What is an average dinner for the family?
Well, I cook a pot of beans and fry some potatoes, some corn or something like that.
Remember when dinner came from actual ingredients instead of a laboratory? When you could pronounce everything on a food label, assuming there even was one? Back then, nobody was gluten-free, dairy-free, or worrying about lectins. We just ate food. Real food. And somehow, despite all the butter and whole milk, people weren't dealing with half the health problems we see today. So what changed? Let's dig into why 1970s meals were a superfood, while modern diets make people sick. The dinner table looked completely different. Pull up a chair to a typical 1970s dinner table, and you'd see something that might shock modern health gurus. A roast chicken with the skin still on, mashed potatoes made with real butter and whole milk, green beans from the garden, or a can with maybe 3 ingredients, and a salad with oil and vinegar. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy, just food. The portions were reasonable because that's what Mom put on your plate. You ate what was served, you didn't go back for thirds, and if you were still hungry an hour later, too bad. Dinner was over. No grazing, no snack drawers, no second dinner at 10 p.m. Your body actually had time to digest and rest between meals. We ate 3 square meals a day, recalls nutritionist Marion Nestle, describing the typical American eating pattern of the era. And that was it. And here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Most of that food came from within 100 miles of where you lived. Not because people were trying to be trendy locavores, but because that's just how the food system worked. Tomatoes came from local farms in summer. In winter, you ate canned tomatoes your mother put up in August, or you did without until next summer. Revolutionary concept, right? Meat wasn't from a science experiment. The chicken on your 1970s plate actually lived like a chicken. It pecked around, ate bugs, took about twice as long to reach market weight as modern chickens. The meat was different, darker, more flavorful. You had to cook it longer because it actually had muscle tone from, moving around. Beef cattle spent most of their lives on pasture eating grass, not standing in feedlots eating corn. Their stomachs weren't designed to digest. The meat had a different fat composition, higher in omega-3 fatty acids, the kind that are actually good for you. When you ate a steak, you weren't getting a side of antibiotics and growth hormones with every bite. Pork came from pigs that lived outdoors, rooted in the dirt, acted like pigs. The fat was firmer, healthier, and yes, it tasted like something. Today's pork is so lean and bland it's basically white meat that gave up. We've bred all the flavor and nutrition out of it in the name of health. Even the eggs were different. Deep orange yolks from chickens that actually saw sunshine and ate a varied diet instead of standing in cages under fluorescent lights eating engineered feed. Those yolks were packed with vitamins and real nutrition, not the pale yellow imposters we get from factory farms today. The produce section wasn't a year-round fantasy. Strawberries in December? That would have seemed insane in the 1970s. Not impossible, but insane. And certainly not affordable for regular folks. You ate what was in season because that's what was available and what you could afford. Summer meant tomatoes, corn, berries, and stone fruits. Fall brought apples, squash, and root vegetables. Winter was potatoes, cabbage, and whatever you'd canned or frozen from the garden. Spring started the cycle over with asparagus and early greens. Your body got variety over the course of a year, not the same identical produce 365 days a year, shipped from 5,000 miles away. Those tomatoes you bought at the farm stand in July were picked ripe. They actually smelled like tomatoes, tasted like tomatoes, and had the nutrition profile of real tomatoes. Compare that to the rock-hard, flavorless pink things bred for shipping that sit in today's supermarkets, picked green and gassed with ethylene to turn red. They look like tomatoes, the way a wax apple looks like an apple. Vegetables hadn't been genetically modified to resist pesticides. They were just vegetables, growing in dirt that still had nutrients in it because farmers still rotated crops and let fields rest. The soil was alive with microorganisms that made nutrients available to plants. Industrial agriculture has strip-mined the nutrition out of farmland, turning it into basically hydroponic dirt that needs constant chemical inputs. Processed food hadn't taken over. Sure, the 1970s had TV dinners and hamburger helper, but the average family still cooked real meals most nights. Mom wasn't Instagram famous for it. She just did it because that's what you did. The kitchen actually got used for cooking, not just reheating. When you bought bread at the store, it had maybe 10 ingredients, and you could pronounce all of them: flour, water, yeast, salt, maybe some milk and butter, if you were fancy. Today's supermarket bread has 40 ingredients, half of which sound like they belong in a chemistry lab. Dough conditioners, preservatives, emulsifiers, and mysterious numbers that supposedly represent vitamins but actually represent synthetic compounds your body barely recognizes. Crackers were crackers. Flour, oil, salt. Not artisanal seed crisps with ancient grains that still manage to have 17 ingredients, including 3 different kinds of sugar hiding under different names. Food manufacturers have gotten very creative with labels, slapping natural and whole grain on products that would have baffled a 1970s housewife. Even kids' food was less insane. Sure, you had sugary cereals and Twinkies, but a kid's lunchbox still usually contained an actual sandwich made from real ingredients, an apple or banana, maybe some carrots, and a cookie that Mom baked over the weekend. Not a Lunchable containing what can only generously be called cheese product and crackers that could survive a nuclear winter. Sugar was still sugar. Here's where it gets interesting. People in the 1970s absolutely ate sugar, but they ate less of it, and it came from more recognizable sources. You had sugar in your coffee, dessert after dinner a few times a week, maybe a cookie with lunch. Nobody was drinking 44-ounce sodas with their meal, and if you wanted a Coke, it came in an 8-ounce glass bottle. Then came high-fructose corn syrup in the late 1970s, and everything changed. Suddenly, corn syrup was cheaper than sugar, and food manufacturers started pumping it into everything. Not just obvious places like soda and candy, but bread, crackers, salad dressing, soup, pasta sauce, and things that had no business containing sweetener at all. Your body processes high-fructose corn syrup differently than regular sugar. It doesn't trigger the same satiety signals, so you keep eating. It goes straight to your liver, gets converted to fat more readily, and contributes to insulin resistance. But it's cheap, so into the food supply it went, and Americans' waistlines and health markers went haywire. The average American now consumes over 150 pounds of sugar and sweeteners per year, compared to about 110 pounds in the 1970s. That 40-pound difference might not sound dramatic, but spread across millions of people over decades, it's a public health catastrophe. And it's not because people suddenly lost willpower, it's because the food itself changed. Fat got demonized and replaced with something worse. The 1970s were right at the turning point when fat started becoming public enemy number 1. Before that, people cooked with butter, lard, and animal fats that humans had been eating for millennia. Then the low-fat craze hit, backed by questionable science and aggressive marketing. Suddenly, butter was evil, and margarine was heart-healthy, despite being basically one molecule away from plastic. Whole milk became skim milk. Full-fat yogurt became non-fat yogurt loaded with sugar to make up for the missing flavor. Salad dressings went low-fat by replacing fat with sugar and thickeners. Everything labeled low-fat or fat-free was actually worse for you than the original version. Your brain is 60% fat. Your hormones are made from fat. Every cell membrane in your body contains fat. You need fat to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K. But the low-fat dogma convinced people that eating fat made you fat, which is like saying eating green beans makes you green. The human body doesn't work that way. Meanwhile, the real culprit, refined carbohydrates and sugar, got a free pass because it was low-fat. People started eating bagels for breakfast instead of eggs, pasta for lunch instead of protein, and wondered why they were hungry 2 hours later and gaining weight. Low-fat cookies, low-fat ice cream, low-fat everything, all loaded with sugar to compensate for removing the fat that made food taste good and kept you satisfied. The low-fat campaign was perhaps the biggest public health mistake of the 20th century. Noted researcher Dr. Walter Willett from Harvard's School of Public Health years later, after the damage was done. Drinks were simpler. In the 1970s, you drank water from the tap, milk with dinner, maybe juice for breakfast, and coffee or tea. That was basically it for most families. Soda was a treat, not a beverage category unto itself. Nobody was drinking vitamin water with 40 ingredients, sports drinks engineered in laboratories, or energy drinks that could probably run a car. Coffee was just coffee, not a 600-calorie milkshake masquerading as a morning beverage. Tea was tea, brewed from actual tea leaves, not some bottled concoction with more sugar than a candy bar. And water? Water was free and came from the tap. Nobody was buying designer water in plastic bottles at $3 a pop. You used a glass, you drank it, you went on with your day. The hydration obsession, where people carry around gallon jugs like they're crossing the Sahara, didn't exist yet. You drank when you were thirsty, and somehow everybody survived. The normalization of constantly sipping sweetened beverages has been a disaster. Your teeth never get a break from acid attacks, your insulin levels stay elevated all day, and you're taking in hundreds of calories without feeling full because the body doesn't register liquid calories the same way it registers food. Snacking wasn't a constant activity. People in the 1970s ate meals, 3 of them at relatively consistent times. If you got hungry between meals, you waited. Maybe you had a piece of fruit or a handful of nuts if you were really desperate. But the idea of eating every 2 hours would have seemed bizarre. Today's advice to eat small, frequent meals and never let yourself get hungry would have been incomprehensible to previous generations. Your grandmother would have looked at you like you'd grown a second head if you needed to eat every couple hours like some kind of hummingbird. The human body runs just fine on 3 meals a day, possibly even better, because it gets periods of rest between eating. The snack food industry didn't really explode until the 1980s and 90s. Before that, snacks were simpler and less available. You didn't have 100-calorie packs of ultra-processed garbage designed to be just unsatisfying enough that you'd eat 3 of them. You didn't have protein bars that are basically candy bars, with added whey powder and marketing. Kids came home from school, maybe had a snack, then waited for dinner. They didn't have individual snack drawers stocked like a convenience store. The pantry wasn't a shrine to processed food, and somehow, mysteriously, they survived until the next meal. Food didn't need a marketing department. A chicken was a chicken. It didn't need to be all natural, cage-free, organic, or humanely raised, because that was just the default. Eggs were eggs. Vegetables were vegetables. Nothing needed 3 different labels assuring you it didn't contain ingredients that shouldn't be in food anyway. The fact that we now need labels telling us bread doesn't contain yoga, matte chemicals, or chicken nuggets are made with white meat is a pretty damning statement about what happened to our food system. If you have to specify that your food is real, that's a problem. In the 1970s, artisan meant overpriced and probably pretentious. Organic was just called farming, because pesticide-soaked industrial agriculture wasn't yet the default. Grass-fed beef didn't need to specify because cattle ate grass. That's what they ate. The idea of feeding them corn and calling it normal would have seemed backwards. Now we pay premium prices for food that's produced the way food used to be produced as standard. We've normalized the aberration and turned actual food into a luxury product. That's some impressive doublethink. The kitchen was still the heart of the home. Families ate together most nights, sitting at an actual table, having conversations. Dinner took at least half an hour because that's how long it takes to eat a real meal and talk to each other. Nobody was scrolling through phones because phones were attached to the wall. Mom or Dad actually cooked, using recipes from index cards, cookbooks with stained pages, or just knowledge passed down from their parents. Cooking wasn't seen as some extraordinary feat worthy of social media documentation. It was just a basic life skill, like doing laundry or balancing a checkbook. The kitchen smelled like food cooking, onion sautéing, bread baking, meat roasting. Not like nothing, which is what processed food smells like when you tear open a package and microwave it. The sounds were different too. Sizzling pans, chopping boards, timers dinging. Not the sad beep of a microwave heating up last night's takeout. Sure, it took time. But that time was considered worthwhile because feeding your family actual food was considered important. Somewhere along the way, we decided convenience was more valuable than nutrition. Speed was more important than health, and individual meals were better than family dinners. Nobody had 17 food allergies. This might be controversial, but here goes. In the 1970s, very few people had food allergies. You had the kid with a peanut allergy, maybe someone who was lactose intolerant, but that was about it. Schools didn't have nut-free zones. Birthday parties had cake that everyone ate. Restaurant menus didn't need warnings about every possible allergen. Something happened between then and now to make food allergies explode. Maybe it's the ultra-processed food. Maybe it's the pesticides or the antibiotics in meat, or the lack of exposure to diverse bacteria. Maybe it's the hygiene hypothesis, or the way babies are fed, or how we've tampered with wheat and dairy. Probably it's all of the above. But the correlation between industrialized food production and the rise in food sensitivities is hard to ignore. Our grandparents ate gluten with every meal and didn't need special bread. They drank regular milk and weren't bloated. They ate food with their hands without requiring hand sanitizer first. This isn't to dismiss people with real allergies and celiac disease, which are serious conditions. But the explosion of food sensitivities should make us question what we did to our food supply. The portions were human-sized. A dinner plate in the 1970s was about 9 inches in diameter. Today's dinner plates are 12 inches or larger. That's a 70% increase in surface area. Same thing happened with glasses, bowls, and serving sizes everywhere. When you ordered a Coke in the 1970s, you got 8 ounces. A small at McDonald's today is 16 ounces, and a large is 30 ounces. The medium size of the 1970s is now the child's size. We've supersized everything and wondered why we supersized ourselves. Restaurants served reasonable portions that one person could actually finish without needing a wheelchair to leave. The endless breadsticks, unlimited refills, and all-you-can-eat buffets weren't yet standard. You ordered a meal, you ate it, and that was plenty. Nobody needed a to-go box the size of a suitcase. Serving sizes at home were controlled by Mom, not by whoever designed the packaging to maximize consumption. A serving of chips was a handful in a bowl, not half a bag eaten straight from the package while watching TV. Cereal was a bowlful, not a mixing bowl filled to the rim. Exercise was called life. Nobody went to CrossFit or had a Peloton in their basement because they didn't need to. Life involved movement. You walked places. You did yard work. You played outside. Kids ran around the neighborhood until the streetlights came on, getting more exercise before dinner than many modern kids get all week. Jobs involved more physical labor. Even office workers walked more, took stairs instead of elevators, moved around during the day. Technology hadn't yet automated away every bit of human movement. You got up to change the TV channel, you walked to the library to look things up, you wrote letters by hand. The gym existed, but it was mostly for athletes and bodybuilders. Regular people didn't feel like they needed a gym membership to compensate for sitting motionless 16 hours a day. They stayed reasonably active just by living their lives. So what happened? The food industry figured out how to make food addictive, cheap to produce, and highly profitable. They hired food scientists to engineer products that hit your bliss point and keep you eating past fullness. They learned to manipulate ingredients to bypass your natural satiety signals. They turned food into a chemistry experiment optimized for profit, not nutrition. Government dietary guidelines, influenced heavily by industry lobbying, pushed people toward processed grains and away from natural fats. The result was a population eating more, weighing more, and getting sicker, despite spending more on health food than ever before. Convenience became king. Time became the scarcest resource. Cooking knowledge stopped being passed down because nobody had time to teach it or learn it. Families stopped eating together because everyone had different schedules and preferences. And we stopped trusting our instincts about food. We started needing experts and labels and nutritionists to tell us what to eat because food had become so confusing. Your grandmother knew how to feed her family. She didn't need a degree in nutrition science because food was just food. The path back. The good news is you can still eat like it's the 1970s if you want to. Buy ingredients instead of products. Cook from scratch most nights. Eat meals at the table without screens. Choose foods your great-grandmother would recognize. Shop the perimeter of the grocery store where the real food lives. Avoid anything with more than 5 ingredients or ingredients you can't pronounce. Buy meat from local farmers if you can afford it, or at least look for options that weren't raised in industrial conditions. Choose produce in season. Eat fats without guilt, especially the natural ones. Drink water. Slow down. Pay attention to what you're eating instead of mindlessly consuming food-like products in front of a screen. Is it more expensive? Sometimes. Is it more time-consuming? Usually. But maybe that's the point. Food that takes time and costs more gets treated with respect. You don't mindlessly inhale a meal you spent an hour preparing. You don't waste food that came from real ingredients and real effort. The 1970s weren't perfect. The nutrition science of the era had plenty of blind spots. But they got some fundamental things right that we've lost. Food came from farms, not factories. Ingredients were ingredients, not laboratory creations. Meals brought families together instead of being consumed in isolation. And somehow, despite eating butter and whole milk and meat with fat on it, people weren't dealing with the epidemic of metabolic disease we see today. Maybe it's time to admit that the grand experiment of industrialized, processed, engineered food has been a failure. Maybe it's time to go back to eating food. If you found this trip down memory lane helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more content about how we used to do things before everything got complicated. And hey, if you've got memories of what dinner was like in the 1970s, share them in the comments. Let's compare notes about when food was actually food.